Welcome to the program Reinventing Democratic Spaces, a program by Humanity in Action. My name is Meerte Vrees and I will be your moderator through this live cast. So today is May 5th, it's National Liberation Day in the Netherlands, and exactly 76 years ago the Netherlands was freed of German occupation. So for many people it's a day of celebration today, but today also really serves as a reminder that we need to protect our freedom as well as our democracy. Because regardless of how strong a democratic society seems, it cannot be taken for granted. Across the globe, nationalism, populism, and racist ideologies are thriving. And although this is a very worrisome trend, we also see incredible initiatives working to protect and reimagine freedom and democracy. And so today we will present you with 4 activists / critical thinkers who do their part not only to ensure freedom, but also make us really aware of all the work that still needs to be done in order for freedom to apply to us all. And to tell us more about these young changemakers and the fellowship they are part of, Laura Lassans, Executive Director of Humanity Action Netherlands, is joining me.
Hi.
Welcome,
Hi,
Laura.
Hi.
Hi. So you invited 4 young leaders of the Alfred Landecker Democracy Fellowship. What is this fellowship about?
Well, the Alfred Landecker Democracy Fellowship is basically one of our most recent projects, launched by Humanity in Action in the fall of 2020. So about 7 months ago.
Yeah.
And we launched this together with the Alfred Landecker Foundation in partnership with them. We're very happy with this collaboration. Yeah. The fellowship brings together a set of 30 diverse leaders that work together and work on their projects for the period of 1 year to reinvent democratic spaces and build community together. This year is actually the first year, and our teams are running this program completely virtually, which is, on the one hand, a challenge, but also quite rewarding, I must say. The fact that we work together on social justice themes with fellows, leaders from different disciplines, different walks of life, and really, even though it's virtually, build community together is just really, really amazing. And
they're also from around the globe, or are they all only from the Netherlands? Or?
The Landacre Fellows are based in Europe and in the United States. And well, we greatly look forward to, after the pandemic, welcome them to our networks. Yeah,
because actually you were supposed to meet right now, right? But as you say, you're doing it virtually.
Yeah.
And so this program is called, I will say reimagining, but reinventing democratic spaces.
Yeah.
In what way does the projects that these fellows have relate to the title of this program?
Yeah. Basically, the fellowship, and that also means the fellows and their projects, focus on strengthening democracy in its broadest sense. Yeah. It's about ensuring that our democracies are strong, resilient, and inclusive. Our fellows, our 30 fellows, do that through their projects. Their projects range from awareness-raising campaigns to educational programs, to documentaries, community projects, and they focus on different themes, social justice-related themes. You could think of a project on public philosophy, a project on building networks among scientists of color, but also a project in Poland empowering activists, LGBTQIA+ activists in that country. Yeah. So it's quite different themes within the broadest context of democracy and making sure that democracy is inclusive and resilient.
And are they all working on a project that they have to finish also within a year, or is it just a working progress? And
they will be finishing it within a year, but I'm very happy also to see, and that is of course what we're working towards. We're working towards sustainable impact in our democracies. So many of these fellows start and kick off the first round, the first year now, and then continue working, I'm sure.
Nice. Well, so we're saying Alfred Landecker this, Alfred Landecker that. Who was Alfred Landecker? Why is there a fellowship renamed after him?
Well, I think that the best thing, because I'm not here alone, of course, tonight, is to share the virtual mic with one of our Landacre fellows, Tomasz Cybulski, who is from Poland, and in his project actually is working on history, on research, and he'll be, I think, best positioned to answer and to share information about the biography of Alfred Landecker.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you.
And well, have also a lot of fun with the virtual coming together of all the fellows. We will watch a clip now from a film Tomasz has made.
Alfred Landecker, a man born in 1884. A man born, interestingly enough, not in Germany as we know it today, but born in something which at that time was called Eastern Prussia. Born in an Eastern Prussian city called Nordenburg. After Eastern Prussia disappeared during and after World War I, the family moved into Germany proper. Alfred Landecker is arrested in late April, and he's put to join the trainload of Jews from Stuttgart area, taking them over 1,000 kilometers east, taking them into Ibiza, taking them into the place we are standing. And from this point, the trace and history of Alfred Landecker discontinues. There are many questions. We know that he was a man of 58 years old when he was deported here. There are many questions about what next. What happened to him? This is a fundamental question. Where is Alfred Landecker buried? This is another sophistication of genocides as we know them. They leave a scar, they leave trauma, they leave silence, and they leave an unknown. It is likely, it is actually very likely, that Alfred Landecker is buried exactly here. He's buried at this Jewish cemetery in Ibiza, as it was known before the war, because this Jewish cemetery of Ibiza became the burial place for all of those Jews that did not survive Ibiza ghetto. And it was very hard to survive Ibiza ghetto for longer than a couple of months, particularly if you were coming here from a completely different assimilated world and you were dumped in the middle of hunger, misery, and fighting for survival. The conditions which German Nazis were repetitively creating in their occupied territories of former Poland. So it is likely that Alfred Landecker is buried in this place. But it is also likely that Alfred Landecker, sometime in summer or autumn of 1942, was put on the train again. So he was once more taken from his primitive dwelling somewhere in the village of Ibiza, put on the train and shipped over a rather short distance. Either 100 kilometers south to the death camp of Bełżec, or more likely, about 100 kilometers north into the German Nazi death camp of.
Yes, welcome Tomasz to the program. I will first give you a proper introduction. Tomasz Cybulski was born in Krakow, Poland, but he grew up in the town of Oświęcim, which is better known as Auschwitz. He holds a PhD in the field of political studies, and he writes on the changing patterns of Holocaust and Auschwitz memory. And in 2000, he started his own company called Poland Travel, in which he combines three of his passions: Jewish history, genealogy, and guiding. Welcome, Thomas, to the program.
Tomasz. Welcome, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. That's probably a question I have to start with. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
That's
yes.
a question we start every meeting for the last 12 months.
Yes, we hear you loud and clear. And to go right into it, why to you is it so important in order for a just and open global future that we focus really on these local histories?
I think local histories matter the most. In my opinion, history education shall absolutely start with micro and family history, with something that concerns us, our families, and the place we live in right now. We need some kind of narrative that engages us emotionally and relates to the place where we have our lives. It is actually very hard to navigate in the global society and contribute to the global exchange of ideas without a personal sense of being rooted, without a sense to belong into some kind of physical space, some code of values. But also it's very hard to exist and exchange ideas without awareness of some local narrative that we represent. Sometimes we are not necessarily aware that we represent this narrative, but we do.
And can you give me a, because you say it's really important so that we feel that it's our personal history, that it relates to humans and so also to us. Can you maybe give me a concrete example of a local history that you find very important in maybe explaining things of the present?
Well, a very concrete example was shown in the short clip to the movie, so thank you for playing this one. Because in a movie like this, or in the way how you narrate history, you connect a person with a place, and try to build a narrative on that, making your audiences aware about what happened to a otherwise benign person, having a benign life in a benign place, somewhere in Germany or maybe somewhere in the Netherlands in the 30s and 40s, and how the bigger history that we are sometimes overlooking or looking for our fingers or actually sometimes even ignoring may affect you very directly and may affect you to the level of sending you 1,000 kilometers away and sending you into a place of murder, a place of genocide. So doing genealogy for the last 20 years and working in local archives, but also working with people, I've really learned that it's probably about time to reclaim history from the hands of politicians, to reclaim history from the hands of round anniversaries on which we hear again and again the same speeches. Really, I was very much studying the narratives of speeches delivered in Auschwitz over the time period of, let's say, 40 years, from 1980 to 2020. And truly speaking, the political system have changed, but the speeches of politicians remain the same. I mean, they usually repeat the same slogans. And usually into such events, you get the same crowd of poor students or pupils lined up in order to participate. Very often they have little or no awareness about what's really behind it. But you can change this narrative. You can change this narrative in a very easy way. You can, for example, change this narrative given a proper education about local history, about people who lived in 1939 in your very house in which you are living now, somewhere in the Netherlands, for example, and trace the story of this particular teen boy or girl into all of the stages of gradual politicization of life around them, of gradual dehumanization, of gradual deprivation of life. So tracing their story, their very narrative, through the gradual stages leading towards a genocide. And unfortunately, in the history of humanity, those stages are repetitive. And we see those stages in each and every case of genocide that humanity experienced, probably from the ancient times.
So, Thomas, if I understand correctly, we should make it more personal, but we should also really change this kind of way in which we tell history, in which we also commemorate. I hear you say that also history, but also commemorations are almost politicized. And we know that history, of course, is very political. The things you choose to tell and you choose not to tell and to put in the high school books and not. Of course, in Poland, history is also used, as in many countries, but let's focus now on Poland, to create this kind of narrative of national identity. How do you operate in the current in this current debate in Poland?
Well, I'll probably have to disagree with you here, because history is not politicized, or at least history shall not be politicized. Because history, as a kind of a perfect entity, it relies on facts, relates to facts, and history as such shall not be politicized. The thing that is politicized is our memory. The thing that is politicized is the narrative of history. And that's a very tempting piece to be politicized by politicians of all kinds, not only in Poland, in order to make usually short-term political gains or even economical gains at times. And we see it in Europe on a daily basis right now. It's kind of in fashion recently to apply history for the sake of making political deals. But how can we get out of this vicious circle of politicizing history and winning history back to the hands of the people where it belongs? Just to remind you, the people, in most cases, the people somewhere down there are usually becoming subjects of this history that is created by the politicians, and very often becoming the victims of this history that is created by the politicians. So I'm finding it very unfair that the last word on this history that happened is the politicized word of the politicians, also telling us how to commemorate and how to make memory alive, or how to maintain memory. So how to break out from this vicious circle? I think awareness of local history, teaching local history and keeping the chronological aspects of teaching history, which is very important. I mean, having the understanding of history is very often about having the understanding of cause-effect relation. And if we disconnect teaching history from cause-effect relation, we are not teaching history, we are teaching singular facts, which are very hard to be connected in the mind of a young person in particular. And that's something that is a problem in many countries in the world right now. So I think that teaching local history, showing history from a perspective of life, not from the perspective of war advantages or disadvantages or events, showing history from the perspective of life of victims before they become victims is essential, because for too long a time, let's say starting in the 80s, when the Holocaust education became global or became gradually globalized in the 80s and 90s, we were only exclusively finding the language of narration about murder and about making it important for the fact that the murder happened in Auschwitz, in Sobibor, and in Treblinka. And of course it was important. But the story is incomplete in such a way, because if we continue to tell the story of genocides only from the perspective of how and where people were murdered, we are completely dehumanizing the victims. We are completely taking away from them the fact that they were as benign human beings as you and me today. They were going for a similar political spectrums of radical speeches and ideologies. And ultimately this process took them to Sobibor, or this process took them to Treblinka. So we have to more teach the process itself, we need to more teach the cause-effect relation, and we need to more focus on chronology to understand. And the basis for that, in my opinion, is always the family history. It always starts somewhere with family history and with telling family stories. And this is what my project is aimed at. It's my project, which is titled the Teen Flying University, is something where I'm working with Polish teens in small 4 Polish cities. I deliberately choose the cities which recently enacted a legislation excluding the LGBT people, and making those young people a little bit more aware about the multi-ethnicity, multiculturality, and about what was actually Polish history about for about 900 years.
Yeah.
Before the Second World War came and produced the Polish society in which we live now. And the Polish society, actually the Central European societies, most of them, are a produce of World War II. As we are celebrating the Independence Day, I think it's worth mentioning. And we all, whether in Central Europe or in Western Europe, actually live in a post-genocide society.
Thomas, I have to interrupt you here because you're making this very good conclusion of everything you had said, making this very strong point about making local and personal histories, and then you got very I understand it, excited, telling about your project you're doing with students to reimagine also the history. And I have to cut it off here, I'm very sorry, but I'm very happy that you made this clear point about the importance of local history. And I really think that people can look up also your project on the website of Humanity in Action and see all you do and how active you are in Poland and also in the debates there and in Europe. So thank you very much, Tomasz, for being here with us.
Thank you very much. You are more than invited not only to look up, but also to participate, because if we make the local histories global, I'm also connecting the local Polish teens with the former inhabitants of those places that were either forced to leave or are not living anymore in those places, mostly because of war. So you are more than welcome to participate in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tomasz. Well, then I have actually 2 people live at my table, which is great. Welcome, Liefnat, welcome, Saadi. I will also give you a proper introduction. Let's start with you. Liefnat Faber is a scholar and programmer based in the Netherlands. She works on the intersection of Jewish culture and heritage, life cycle and community and cinema. It's a very big intersection. Currently, Liefnat works on a co-creating a Jewish hub, OIV, and this open, inclusive and unapologetically Jewish hub aims to provide a safe and creative space for Jews and non-Jews to express, celebrate, co-create, remember and relate to cultural traditions and heritage.
Okay.
It's such a mouthful, but I think you will tell us in the program more about OIV. Saadi Zandvliet, welcome, is a social studies teacher and professor of Afro-Dutch studies at the Amsterdam University of Applied Science. Saadi, you studied African American studies at Boston University, and then when you returned to the Netherlands, you took the initiative to start a course on Afro-Dutch studies at the University of Amsterdam. It's a decolonial interdisciplinary course that focuses on the history and present-day realities of Afro-Dutch people. Yes? Welcome. Well, I just spoke with Tomasz a lot about the importance to him the importance of history in his work. So my first question is, how important is history in your work? But to start with you.
Oh.
Yeah.
As you said, Afro-Dutch Studies is a course that focuses on the history and present-day realities of Afro-Dutch people. So the history is very important. And one of the works that motivates me in my course is a book called Silencing the Past by Michel Rolf Trio. He's a Haitian historian. He also plays a role in this new documentary by Raoul Peck, Exterminate All the Brutes. You should check it out. But one of the sentences in this book that really stuck with me is the sentence that Trio writes is, the past is the past because of the present. So with my students, I'm always stressing the point, like, at this moment, we're deciding what narratives do we include? What is acceptable data? What do we include in the archives? What can we find in the archives? And if we can't find it in the archives, how are we going to still craft a narrative, a story? Because the history is related to our present-day reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you then agree with Tomáš that history in itself is objective, but it's the narrative that is subjective or politicized, or do you also question whether history itself is really that objective?
Like, even the moment history is being made, it's not objective already. The moment something happens, certain people will be included and certain people will be excluded, and that's a result of subjectivity and a power dynamic, and history making is this dynamic of power. So, like, I would question the objectivity of history
in itself.
I will always question that. Yeah.
Livnat, for you, opening, also working on this this progressive cultural Jewish hub. How important is history for you, or are you sometimes maybe also done with history?
Never. No, history is really important for me personally, but also in the project that we're working on. And I think that what I'd like to highlight here is that when you're working with a traumatized, marginalized group of people, in essence, there's something about ancestral trauma that needs to be addressed. So next to all the cultural aspects of celebration and of maybe religion or other rituals, etc., and storytelling and philosophy and all of these things that are very important, what relates to me most to history in this present moment, also with this topic tonight, is really to address ancestral trauma and how it's important to realize that this is one of the things that we as minorities need to make space for, I think. Because
this ancestral trauma is still present in the way people act today?
Yes, and it is very, very under... it's not spoken about so much. So people, tell their stories. Not always. There's a lot still that is for Jews. Of course, you just said that the war ended 76 years ago. That's really recent history. We're talking second generation people and third generation growing up now. And I think that when we look at remembrance, for example, here in the Netherlands, that we speak about it as if we have recognized the genocide really, but we haven't. And I think that comes with really addressing the trauma that was done and the effects of it. So to really stare that beast into the eye. And Roxanne van Iperen, who held the speech, the writer who held the keynote speech last night, she addressed it. She said, we're living in a remembrance culture of not knowing, like the ignorant, blissful not knowing. And I think it relates to the Second World War and the genocide on Jews, Roma and Sinti, but it definitely relates to our colonial history as well. So this is where I just
wanted to ask you, Sadi, how do you relate to ancestral trauma?
There's always a segment in my course that we talk about ancestral trauma. I work a lot with guest lecturers, and one of the guest lecturers that we work with is Glenn Helberg, psychiatrist here in Amsterdam. I think he was born on Curaçao or in Suriname, and then he lived on Curaçao. But he works from a cultural sensitive perspective, and he's the guest lecturer for that course, for that segment of the course. So I definitely address it, and you also have that book, this book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Professor Joy de Grue. So yes, it's definitely a topic that we discuss during my course. Yes.
And can I make it personal? I mean, you're both change makers, so you're really also working on the present, changing something now. Do you then also really had to deal first with your personal, almost ancestral trauma to be a good change maker? I'd like to respond.
I don't know if you can't say about yourself that you're a good change maker. I think I don't know.
I said that, okay, and then cool. You can respond.
Right. So I don't think it was a prerequisite, but I do think it comes up somewhere along the lines that I'm working on this. And for me, it's based in North Africa. I feel very lucky not to have in that sense, a direct Holocaust trauma background. This is a different story, but definitely it comes up in sort of who you are and also how you relate and the stories you received from home and the things that are unknown in your story that are holes.
Yeah, the same for me. And I'm still dealing with it on a daily basis. When you have like acts of what they call quote-unquote microaggressions and you feel like, oh, I should have said something. So on a daily basis, I'm dealing with this trauma. But for me, a significant thing is that in 2018, I think, and in 2019, I had this chance to travel to Gorée in Senegal to visit what they call a slave castle. I would just call it a prison. And I did that in Ghana as well. And I think that's an important part for me as well, to see and just to see the door of no return and just like to be there and to wash my face and talk to my ancestors. So that was also a part of maybe dealing with the ancestral trauma. Yeah. Yes.
Making a ritual kind of to deal with it.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I was thinking about, again, about the title of this program, Reinventing Democratic Spaces. Then let's focus on the reinventing, because it assumes that something needs to be reinvented, you know, that what was there wasn't good enough. So yeah, in what way do you maybe think that people before you weren't connected to the past or weren't taking notice that much of the past, you know, to really make a change?
So when it comes to reinventing, my answer would be a yes and no, because yes, we're dealing with new threats. For example, the democratic spaces are under threat by disinformation, for example. But I would also say reinventing no, because there's also a trick of the system to discontinue the transfer of knowledge. For example, Afro-Dutch studies, actually it isn't new. There was like Afro-Dutch studies, or it wasn't called like that. There was a course like that in the 80s, in the 90s, and in the early 2000s at the University of Amsterdam. So reinventing, I always stress the point that we're also just standing on the shoulders of giants. Yeah. And so don't throw away the baby with the bathwater, I think they would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so okay, yeah.
Yeah, I can really relate to what you're saying, Zodi, because I think that coming at this from like a Jewish activist perspective, trying to sort of get a seat at the table in the more anti-racist movements here in the Netherlands, it feels like such a new thing to do, or you know, you're being looked at like, okay, what's a Jew doing here? It's a very weird feeling to have. At the same time, there's just a really big gap of knowledge. And again, I really think that this is because Jews in Holland are a really marginalized group and heavily traumatized from this recent war and anti-Semitism that led to genocide, that there's just no transfer of knowledge. And I had, until the Groene Amsterdammer had the article about Blanes, about this Jewish activist group in the 80s, but it went on till 1999 with a monthly magazine or a quarterly magazine, whatever. But there was already a lot of links, alliances made. But where are they, and why did we forget about them so quickly in just 2 decades? And so, yeah, reinventing, yes, but also the transfer of knowledge and the transfer of friendships and the transfer of...
Why do we forget them? Because I also heard you say, like, yeah, people make us... I'm paraphrasing you. People make us believe that something is new or wasn't there before. But who can you explain? What are those systems? Of how does that come? That
I can specifically talk about the Afro-Dutch Studies course, for example, and it has to do with funding as well. Like the moment the money stops, people are out of work, and then one advice and maybe one thing that we should reinvent is maybe this intergenerational dialogue that would help, because I would love to have a debate with Chris Mullert, who was the director of this Center of Race and Ethnic Studies at the University of Amsterdam. But one of the ways that we see this discontinuity in the transfer of knowledge is the moment funding stops. And then again, that's why I like an organization like the Black Archives, for example, because they are not that depending on external funding. And then hopefully this body of knowledge that they create will keep developing and it will not discontinue at one point.
Yeah, maybe you say this is very important, this intergenerational knowledge that is given through. Maybe what I've heard in earlier discussions, I don't know how you relate to this, is that sometimes when a new generation of activists rise, the older generation is like, oh, really? You think you came up with this, And the new generation is like, why have people been quiet for so long? How do you recognize these kind of sentiments, and how can you overcome those? Because it is so important that the knowledge keeps passing through.
I recognize it, but it's not the way I work. For example, with Afro-Dutch studies, I always include guest lecturers. Gloria Wecker was one of the first person who saw my syllabus. Frank Drachtenstein, an amazing historian, is one of the first guest lecturers who gave a lecture during my course. Guno Jones. I always include the older generation, but yes, some of the new generation of activists might think that they invented all of this, but that this isn't true, and it would help. And that's why I really like the point that Thomas made about local history, and it would help if if us young new generation of activists would just do a brief research on our own local history, like who were there in the 80s, who were there in the 70s, and should we reinvent, to what extent, yes or no. So yes, I recognize it, but it's really a thing that we shouldn't do, because much of the older generation are still alive. You can really send an email to Ernestine Comvalius, who's the director of Bama Park, and who was also a very active person in the 70s and 80s with Lawson, for example. So no, we should definitely have this again, this intergenerational dialogue. Yes,
clear, very clear. So maybe this is also, there should be intergenerational solidarity. That is maybe also a conclusion, but then also focus on another part of solidarity, a project of yours, Liefnaat, because the focus in your Alfred Landecker Fellowship is to create a lasting connection within the Jewish activist community and with broader activist community, if I'm correct, in the Netherlands, especially in Amsterdam. You just already said a little bit about it, that you feel like a pioneer, an outsider. Also, this is historically maybe not correct. Why is this so important to you, this solidarity between, do you say more minorities or marginalized groups?
I think marginalized group, but I think I don't know. We're also minorities, but I think together we're quite a big group, so I'm hesitant to use the word minority, because it also makes us very small. I think we're really big, but we are marginalized.
Marginalized groups,
I don't know. It's just, semantics, I don't know. So in order to explain very briefly why I think solidarity between communities, let's put it that way, is really important now, I just need to reiterate that. So where I come from, so this is a very traumatized community, right? And after the war, and I don't think many people know this, but also, during the Second World War, more than three quarters of the Jewish population of the Netherlands was deported and murdered. So the community was just completely,
shattered. Or not shattered, gone.
Gone. It was gone, and also. We're here now, of course, we'll come to Liberation Day. Yesterday was National Remembrance Day, but it all sounds like, and then the war was over and everybody was so friendly to the Jews and there was no anti-Semitism and the Netherlands was a wonderful place to live. This wasn't the case. So people came back, if they came back at all, to nothing, to other people living in their houses. Very harsh human conditions to come back to. Then you have a community that is completely shattered and tries to rebuild itself. And I think people are just not aware of this, like what this was like right? They're trying to find one another. They're trying to rebuild Jewish life, whatever that looks like. A lot of people don't know, but a lot of the Jewish people in Amsterdam, for example, were secular Jews. Like there's so many different groups that were in that marginalized group that were destroyed. And also another thing is that a lot of Jews that have a Holocaust family background, a drama and a trauma there, now are not recognized as Jews by the community at the moment, because it's really, I mean, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of strictness. So the community is also trying to reinvent itself. And I mean, it's a work in progress, but what it means on the ground is that as a Jew, you might not even belong to that community, and so you're feeling really not rooted, something that Tomasz also referred to, this need for rootedness. And so there you are, right? Okay, and so now...
So this is the solidarity, why you also say solidarity within the Jewish community is important, because that isn't a very clear case to begin with.
Yes,
yeah.
And I think that a lot of Jews that are looking for also to create solidarity with other groups, they're trying to find one another, and it's very difficult to find one another when community building is still a thing that is happening. So that's why we created OIV, because it's a non-religious, I mean, a secular cultural Jewish hub. And so people have been coming together there. And so the project I started was more of an accident that had happened when George Floyd was murdered. A group of us wrote a solidarity statement, and this sort of, with the Black community in whatever the States, but also in the Netherlands, and this sort of got the ball rolling. Yep. And we realized that there was a lot of necessity and a lot of need for Jews within the community to connect over these issues.
And to ask, just to ask, why was it kind of obvious for you, or the right moment to write the solidarity statement?
Right. Okay. So because there was total silence from the Jewish community. So if you look at Jewish leadership, there was just no response. One Facebook post that was made, but I mean, there was just such an. I mean, people were talking about it. It was a thing that was discussed, but to come out into the open and to pledge solidarity was another thing. And I think really it has to do with a lot of fear. Like, we have to understand, again, the traumatized community. But for me, the solidarity was really, really important to make that step, because I think that we're not minorities, right? And we are actually fighting for the same recognition. I think it will all start with official recognitions of wrongs that were done, in order to build, to reimagine this democratic space, whatever. But we need to do it together. So it was a no-brainer that this is the step that we need, and Jews need to be in that discussion.
And is it to kind of make, in the end, a stronger platform together, to know that you're all in this together, to create a solidarity between groups? Or is it on a deeper level, to understand that your pain is my pain, and I will defend you because I understand the threats. On what level is this solidarity?
I think on a couple of levels, both of the levels that you mentioned. I think it's about human interaction, human solidarity, and then also talking about an ancestry, where we come from. But it's also about political solidarity, it's about political action, it's about making a move together, about being a stronger team together. And it's about being human. I think we're all like very obsessed with our own lives. At the end of the day, this is friendships, talking to one another, understanding, understanding who you are, and getting rid of all the prejudice.
Yeah. Were you part of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations?
I went to both of them in Amsterdam.
Yeah. Was solidarity by other minority groups important to you in any way?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and that's for me as a person, that's a no-brainer, because all these minorities will be the majority if we look at this fight against inequality. And also with this, that's what we see with this fellowship, and that's what inspired me during this last couple of months, that you see all these people across the globe who are trying to reinvent democratic spaces, but real concretely, they're just trying to make a better tomorrow.
Yeah. So because in your work and also in your project, equality, equal opportunity is very important, if I'm correct. So you say this solidarity is also needed in order to achieve those goals, or not?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And when you, is solidarity always an, how you say that, open arm, kumbaya situation? Where was everyone like Saudi so happy that OIV pledged its solidarity?
I think everybody that I spoke to face, and I think this is one of, I mean, Corona sucks because I think it's very important to meet face to face. But it's not a kumbaya situation.
What makes it hard, solidarity on...
I think a lot of ignorance and prejudice and narratives, and I think they go both ways. I think all of us have these. For us specifically, or for me and for this grassroots group that is now building itself, because that's what it is. It's a grassroots group of people that have pledged to want to do something in solidarity. What's happened is that we've really noticed that Jews are being placed as white in the identity politics discussion, and this is very interesting and problematic for us in order to participate in a conversation. So you have to get a seat at the table, or to just bring your own seat, and then to sit there, you will have to defend yourself why you're there. And this is something that really messes with me. And so,
For me, it also is, I'm curious how you think. Like, to defend solidarity almost sounds, like a contradiction. Is that a contradiction or not?
What do you mean?
To defend, like, I'm what's the word? I'm here because I'm. What is the solidaire? I'm because
I want to pledge solidarity.
I want to pledge solidarity, and then people will say like, "Why you're here? So you have to defend, your pledge." Is that it? Almost seems counterintuitive, or am I missing something? Or
well, sometimes you do get this Olympics of suffering.
Oppression Olympics.
Yeah, that's a hard thing, and hopefully people will just let that be, because that's hard. If I'm going to a demonstration for, I don't know, Gaza, and someone asks me like, "What are you doing here?" That makes it hard, and we should stop doing that. Yeah,
because if you see all the threats that I named, the nationalism, the populism, the racist ideologies, is then the solidarity is brutally needed. But is it also sometimes that you're not, that even, how do you say that? Your freedom, or that the freedom you're seeking or the safety you're seeking is almost in how you say that, in contrast with the freedom you're seeking?
I don't think so. I think we're looking for the same thing. And again, I think it would start with recognition of wrongs that were done, then moving on to looking to institutionalize these lessons, or really into the system. So it would be education. It would be how we do neighborhoods. It would be in so many different layers of society that we need to institutionalize these. Whatever comes, what Thomas said, there's cause and effect, right? So if we say, okay, we recognize that that the Netherlands did this, and this to these these communities, right? Logically, it will follow from there that we need to institutionalize those lessons. Otherwise, poof, it's nothing. And then the third thing is that we need to do radical storytelling, radical sharing of stories. And I think that, and we meet each other there. There's no, my freedom is not more important than your freedom, and our stories may differ dramatically because they are located in different parts of the world. And at the end of the day, we're Dutch. We need to reclaim this as our shared history. Freedom.
Agree.
Yeah. Now, what does today is a National Liberation Day? Were you festive all day, Saudi? Do you have a flag hanging out of your house? Well, My neighbors have, but
Okay.
what? No, I don't. Without, how do you? What does National Liberation Day mean to you?
That's a hard question for a post-colonial immigrant. Let me start off by stressing the fact that the victims of the Second World War have my full sympathy, empathy, and we should commemorate, and we should at one point celebrate. And as a post-colonial immigrant, I feel this sense of double consciousness coming up, looking at yourself through the eyes of the other, because when I voice my opinion, a lot of people will not be happy, because this day, and also yesterday, growing up in the Netherlands, I always have this feeling like, what are we commemorating again, and what are we celebrating? If we look, there's Amos César, this French poet, French Italian poet. He wrote something, and I'm paraphrasing. He said something like, "What happened during the Second World War? The European countries developed and perfected this in the colonies. So if we only see this, the events of the Second World War as a single event, and not as a string of events that started maybe in 1492." Then as a post-colonial immigrant, this day for me, I really have to ask the question, what am I celebrating, and what am I commemorating? What are we remembering? Which narratives do we include? Which persons do we include? Are we going to talk about that only after a few months after the Second World War, the Dutch government decided to do a full attack on Indonesia? So for me, this day, it's a strange day. And if you ask me how I feel unsettled. I feel uneasy. I kind of feel unsafe saying this, but since you asked me, I'm going to say it. But feeling unsafe, actually, it's a good thing, because if I felt safe, I probably wouldn't voice my opinion.
Yeah.
And this narrative of remembrance, and this narrative of commemorating and celebrating, it is changing. And it is changing because people were like, okay, I feel unsafe, but I'm going to say it. What are we celebrating? What are we remembering? The 4th and the 5th of May. And I'm going to stress this point again. As a post-colonial immigrant, for me, as a person who lives in the Netherlands, I really have to ask the question, what am I celebrating today?
Yeah. I will also ask this question to Liefnat, and then because I looked at the time, I was like, oh my God, we have to finish it. But then, so my question last question to you will be like, okay, what for you is needed, and not the whole shebang, but just a first step or a very clear thing that this day also feel to you personally, or the community you talk for, but maybe you took just on a personal note, that it feels more like a celebrational day. But Liefnat, also to you the question, what does the 5th of May represents to you? Or do you feel celebrative and have the flag hanging outside?
I feel happy that the war was over. I think that's a first. But it wasn't really over, so we have the 15th of August as a day that the war ended in the Dutch colonies. So it's a day that I like to mark time. It's a thing that I really like to do. So I like to mark that this day marks the end of a war that we had in the Netherlands. But the 5th of May celebration has become a celebration of freedom. Yeah. Okay, so I think there's a difference between marking the time, like a factual time, the 5th of May, the 15th of August. These are important dates, I think, to mark.
To commemorate.
To commemorate, to have a moment of realization, okay, this is where the story and takes place. But I think that a celebration, I'm not really comfortable with this idea. Because it's a freedom for who,
Yeah.
right? And so the thing is that in order to, I don't think I would love to celebrate. I would love to have a Dutch national celebration day, but it will not happen until there has been a recognition of wrongs done. So that would be my answer to what's the first step.
Yeah. Well, I think this is becoming, what you already said, much more vocal. That a lot of more people are saying. Also, people are even starting about what are we celebrating if we have borders in which we do not allow any people. But that is another discussion. But
there's
then
so much. Yeah.
I have to already end this really nice talk then with you, Saadi. Like, could you give us an first idea of a moment for you that it makes it more of a celebration also to you?
We should include more narratives.
Narratives.
Oh, yeah, include more narratives.
Yeah.
That's it.
Period.
Period.
Okay.
Can I say one thing about narratives, like 2 seconds? Yeah, to be specific, is because this is the thing, not a one size fits all, but to be very specific in telling stories.
Very specific
And then
in telling stories. Well, thank you for sharing your ideas and your personal also experiences and stories, and also really look up the projects that Liefnat and Saadi are doing for the Alfred Landecker Fellowship. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then now I'm going to my last guest from the US. Hi, Asha.
Hello.
Hi. I will also give you a proper introduction. Asha Imanfil is a curator and arts teacher based in the US. She's a curatorial fellow at the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago. In 2019, she was a curator for the Tokyo show Black and Brown Are Beautiful at the Hyde Park Art Center. And she positioned artists of color at the center of global dialogues, advocating solidarity across communities kept apart due to geographic or political distance. Welcome, Asha. Well, you've listened, I think, to the discussion so far, and I was really wondering how this discussion on solidarity between minority groups resonates with your own research and projects with regard to cross-cultural solidarity.
Yes, thank you again for having me. I sent a few images ahead of time of global productions of A Raisin in the Sun, the play by Black American queer female writer Lorraine Hansberry, 1959, first Black woman to have a play on Broadway. The play was translated into 30 different languages. It won the New York Critics Circle Award that year for Best Play. When I think about, getting to your question about solidarity, when I think about what racism is, it wants people to believe that their ideas don't matter. It wants them to believe indeed that they are minorities. When I think about, the term minority, it is semantics, but for me, I am not the lesser part of anything. Saudi and Liebnat or yourself are not the lesser part of anything. So for me to see the global impact of this play by, again, a Black woman from the South Side of Chicago in 1959, the height of American racism, the solidarity of how it was embraced around the world, I think is quite significant. Yeah. It's interesting too. So I started looking at these images in 2016, looking at different global productions of the play. Yeah. I came across it thinking about art history and performance studies. If we look on the left, there's the original Broadway cast, 1959 in New York. Yeah. And it was very surprising to me to actually see the play only a few years later being done in blackface, quite significantly throughout the decade of the 1960s. But I think more than that, I was curious how this play was being transferred and translated so often. So there's a very complex history with this play, and it's something that I think is important to acknowledge and to really delve into. If we look at the next slide.
So do you see, Asha, the fact that this play was played in so many countries, do you see that automatically as a form of cross-cultural solidarity, or is that too fast a conclusion?
Well, here's the amazing thing. If we look at the left, in 2016, we are in Sweden, and we're seeing the play being done there by an Afro-Swedish theater company, thinking about what it means in that local context. If we, thinking again about racism and all sorts of issues. If we look on the right, the play is being done in 2020 and 2021 in China. The director there said, we're not thinking about racism or anti-Blackness in the way that you perhaps would in other contexts or the US. We're thinking about class and family and who gets to live where. So when I see the different ways that this play, again, one very specific story has been contextualized all over the world, I think the solidarity of that is amazing. And again, it goes back to me what it is to share stories and what it is to that sharing of narratives. Yeah, I think is really significant with this work.
Do you think that sometimes people are almost not aware of the solidarity that already is already there?
Very much so. Again, I think with racism and these divisions, the white supremacy or the powers would like us to believe that we are alone, and in fact we're not. And our ideas have always been shared and appreciated amongst each other. So again, that's what's so exciting to me about looking at the history of this play.
Yeah, very nice. And I was really wondering, because you are part of this group of change makers of the Alfred Landecker Fellowship, and we, what I said, we live in very difficult times. On the other hand, there are a lot of people with great ideas and optimistic ideas. And I was wondering, for you, are you optimistic or pessimistic now about the times and about the role you can have?
I am optimistic about the power of the 30 other people I've met in this fellowship. So thinking about, again, the history of the play Raisin in the Sun, my project is actually an exhibition that takes place as part of the Chicago Architecture Biennial at a very impressive, amazing art space here, 6018 North, working with 30 different artists. I think whenever you're able to rally numbers of people for a cause together, I'm always optimistic. And it's really seeing people respond that keeps me that way. And I believe in that very much.
Good. And for young people who are looking and feel that they have, I don't know, a change maker within them, but they don't know where to start, you know, they feel like, well, maybe they feel voiceless or powerless. What would your advice to them be?
Yeah, I would go back to one of my favorite quotes from someone I know, you are not the lesser part. Again, it doesn't matter what society tells you. It doesn't matter what constructs exist. You are not the lesser part. And I think that's a way to move through the world and find your own leadership style for young people. Just knowing that and always acting in that way.
Thank you very much for these encouraging words, Asha, and we wish you very luck with it. So there's an exhibition of the play, right?
So the exhibition is working with actually about 34 contemporary artists from Chicago as well as globally, doing interpretive pieces based on what the play means for them, based on their own experiences of home, whether home is a welcoming space, whether home is a threatening space or a space of violence. Thinking about, place and home. So it will happen September 17th is our launch date here in Chicago. We'll have a virtual exhibition as well as taking over an old historic home in a formerly all-white segregated neighborhood of Chicago, which is now integrated.
I think that also kind of almost relates to what Tomasz said, like making a history, you know, very personal, very local. And also what Liefnat and Zadi addresses, like the enormous importance of storytelling. So really thanks for sharing this beautiful project with us.
Yes, I have one more thought. Is it okay? I know there's not much time.
No, you can.
Cool, thank you so much. Again, just thinking about solidarity and listening to my colleagues and thinking about these artists, there is something very important to me about witnessing, that we all have to witness the oppression and we all have to witness each other's stories, and that's how we stand together. So in my project, as well as the projects I think my peers are describing, it's about that witnessing and the solidarity in that.
Well, that's very beautiful. And I think it's also that actually what you said, Liefnat, like you have to witness each other, listen to each other. And well, I thought this today, the 5th of May, maybe it's not for everyone a celebration, but it was really a day also about rethinking and also what this day should become. I really want to thank you, Zadi, Liefnat, Asha, Tomasz, and Laura. Of course, I want to thank Pakhuis de Zwijger for this evening. And if you want to know more about this Alfred Landecker Democracy Fellowship, then go to the website of Humanity in Action. And the call for applications for the second cohort opens in May 18th. So if you are inspired, please go to the website. And for more updates, please follow us on social media. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Bye.